All right, well, I am still messing around with the format, and we are still only an hour instead of 2, but you can still check out this and past podcast programs on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Google Play, and, of course, at GraniteRock.com. All right, so before we get started, to give you an idea who's going to be on the program today, Mike Rogers joins me to, well, you'll find out what we talk about. We've also got Dustin Siggins from Stream.org. He's going to talk about a recent ruling in Massachusetts regarding gender and how it affects local churches. I've also got Greg Moore on the program. He joined me to have a post-primary conversation about the results of the elections on Tuesday in New Hampshire, what the turnout means. We have a good lengthy discussion. So we've got your standard right-wing conspiracy stuff, communists and Islamo-fascists in the bushes, the Gestapo attacking the culture, the Democrat Party pursuit of a one-party nation, all kinds of good stuff coming up. But before we do that, we're going to do this.
I would be a lot less afraid of it if I just knew what it was called.
Let's call it Steve.
Steve?
It's a pretty name.
Steve sounds nice.
Yeah, I'm a lot less scared of Steve.
Oh, great and powerful Steve! What do you want?
I don't think you can speak.
Well, here's a story from NH1 News. Outrage at UNH as $1 million of librarian's $4 million donation goes to scoreboard, $100,000 to the library. This is by Alexandra Prim at NH1.com. Durham, New Hampshire. In the wake of late librarian's generous donation, the University of New Hampshire has come under fire for its spending choices. Robert Morin, who died in 2015 after working as a cataloger for the library at UNH for almost 50 years, left a surprise $4 million fortune to the institution. Upon the university's announcement of the gift, the initial general reaction was overwhelmingly positive. However, once UNH revealed it would allocate $1 million toward the purchase of a new video scoreboard for its recently renovated football field, much of the public sentiment turned sour. UNH alum Claire Cortez wrote on the Odyssey Online that the school's administrative decision to spend a quarter of Morin's generous donation on an inconsequential trinket for the athletic department is a complete disgrace. I think complete disgrace describes a lot of UNH spending decisions. In total, $100,000 will be invested in Morin's former workplace, the library, as per a stipulation attached to the donation. Cortez suggested multiple alternative uses for the $1 million, such as a full 4 years of tuition for 14 in-state students, or 242 year-long student meal plans. The college's Facebook page has also seen negative feedback regarding the scoreboard purchase. One Facebook user called the decision shameful. Another wrote that it was a disgrace to Morin's memory. Given that this is just another in a long line of bad spending decisions by the University of New Hampshire, I think UNH should give 25 times the cost of the scoreboard back to the taxpayers every budget cycle. What do you think about that idea?
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now, at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
My next guest has served as the Public Relations Officer and D.C. correspondent for LifeSite News and is the co-author of the forthcoming book, Bankrupt Legacy, The Future of the Debt-Paying Generation. He has contributed to National Review, The Blaze, The Federalist, American Thinker, and others, and is currently an associate editor for TheStream.org. Dustin Siggins, thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks for having me, sir.
Okay, so on September 1st, the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination released a draft document titled Gender Identity Guidance that could have some serious ramifications for local churches in the Bay State. Can you explain that for me?
So the document itself was put out on September 1st and takes effect October 1st. It says groups that are open to the public, to the general public, for services and for business, etc., called public accommodations, will have to follow these new regulations. And the regulations include no what they will call discrimination on employment, discrimination on housing, and even pronouns, he, she, they, etc. Well, I guess not they, but he and she, that sort of thing. And it says that churches can be included in this if they open up secular, what they called secular events to the public. And the example they used was a spaghetti dinner. Bollock over at the Washington Post, he's a legal analyst over there, pointed out that, churches consider spaghetti dinners part of fellowship. They consider that part of a way to get people to come to their church, to kind of participate in that process and maybe join the church. It's not just a secular event. Just because the state doesn't see, I'm Catholic, so it doesn't see the host being broken in front of everybody doesn't mean it's not religious. And so it creates a real problem here for conservatives who have long been told that we were overreacting to the anti-tolerant tolerance and to the what they call the separation of church and state, but now they're trying to use the state to condemn and attack churches.
I think early on in New Hampshire, when we had the gay marriage debate, and they eventually crammed the legislation through, and Governor John Lynch, who said he was never going to sign anything like that, signed it into law.
I remember that. I'm from New Hampshire. I remember it very well.
Yeah. We talked about how, this is just another foot in the door. This sort of thing we're talking. I mean, we've seen florists, bakers, photographers litigated out of business. Should Massachusetts churches be worried?
I would say so. Tyler O'Neill, who's an editor at PA Media, he's the reason I found out about this whole thing through Facebook. He pointed out this will probably go to the Supreme Court and that churches should gear up to, really face some significant battles here through the legal system. I'm sure I heard about this story over the weekend. I was not able to contact the Alliance Defending Freedom and Liberty Council, any of the other groups, First Liberty, that are likely to take this sort of case. But I suspect by the time, October 1st, October 10th, I expect I'll be getting emails on my reporter email about the many churches that are going to be opposing this regulation. Because not only is it a regulation, it actually passed through the state legislature, 26-13 in the state Senate, I believe. And it's really atrocious. I've been meaning to look up. I don't know what Governor Baker said about this. I assume he signed it because it's law. But it's really atrocious that a Republican governor didn't do anything to stop this. Regardless of what one thinks about the gender identity, LGBT fight, you're going to say to people, you're going to be punished. As a church, especially, but any business should be able to say, this is what we want to do. This is what happened in North Carolina, too, with the HB 2 law, where Charlotte, North Carolina said to everyone in the city, you have to listen to us. And when HB 2 was passed, all HB 2 said was, for the most part, everyone can do what they want. Cities can't force other people to do what they want, but they can have their own internal policies on bathrooms and locker rooms and stuff like this. And what did the nation's highest-ranking attorney say? Attorney General Loretta Lynch compared this to Jim Crow laws. She legit compared in her big speech. She said it was compared to Jim Crow laws. Now, Jim Crow laws, I wasn't alive back then, but as I understand it, Jim Crow laws said blacks and whites must be separate, and blacks must be kept down. All HB 2 did was say, if you agree on one side, go ahead. If you agree with the other side, go ahead. You have the liberty to do what you want to do as a business owner, which is what has been happening in all of history. It didn't change anything. It just put into law what should be everyday practice, and was everyday practice until Charlotte got in the way. And now we're seeing this in Massachusetts.
I saw a couple things that really, really startled me. The gender pronouns reference, first of all, combined with this, and I'm going to have two different statements. Now, in your article, you quote a footnote from page 4 of the guidance document that states, violation of the law shall be punished by a fine of not more than $2,500 or by imprisonment for not more than 1 year or both. In addition, the violator shall be liable to the aggravated person for damages. And there's no clear statutory definition of gender identity. You don't need any proof whatsoever to be offended.
And actually, if you try to get proof, that's problematic. And this is where, as bad as the Obama administration has been on this issue and on religious liberty in general and everything else related to, common sense and human nature, the administration, at least, if I remember correctly, its guidance, if you will, to the Department of Education, at least said that there has to be a doctor's note and parental involvement and certain other qualifiers. This law, just like the one in Charlotte, North Carolina, said, just like Target's policy, if you will, which of course, that's a private group, they can do what they want.
Sure.
All these people all said, no, you have to take them at their word. So you have to take somebody at their word. And the radical side of this is that people who believe in the gender identity movement, they believe gender can change frequently, right? You can feel one way or think you're one way. And therefore, literally, I could walk into a Target or walk into a restaurant and say, I feel this way. And you can't do anything. You literally cannot do or say anything because I say I feel it. And this creates the real problem where It doesn't require even a doctor's note or a practice to say, like, again, with the Obama administration, the Department of Education guidance said, it has to be, the young person has to be doing certain behaviors for a while. Their parent has to tell you this is actually going on. It can't just be, I think it, therefore. So this is what these other laws are saying.
What really confuses me about this, and maybe confusion's the wrong word, interesting, is what just because you can't know if you're going to offend somebody when they can choose to be offended at any particular time without proof.
Right.
And the law forces you to use language defined by the statute. So how is this not compelled speech? I just don't understand.
That's a good point. That's a great point. I'm not a lawyer, so I hadn't even thought about that. That's a really good point.
I do a lot with free speech. It just because I'm a blogger, at any moment somebody's going to go, but the first thing I thought of.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
I said,
yeah. Want that one again?
I'm sorry, that was discriminatory. So I think it sounds like compelled speech to me. It really does.
That's a good point. I guess the question, though, is that, and I'm necessarily ignorant on this, there are some limits to free speech, right? Mm-hmm. You can be compelled to, if you work in certain environments, to not use the N-word, right? Sure. Or to not use certain words that are automatically considered offensive. I'm not saying he and she are. And nor should they be, especially considering 0.3% of Americans declare themselves to be, quote unquote transgender. So, but I just think devil's advocate for a moment. I have to think there has to be some level where this has been done before, and they would use that to say, well, look, using the Jim Crow law example, well, this is just as bad as what we saw 60 years ago. That's what they're going to say.
I'm sure they are, but the word places of public accommodation is very broad, and it seems to me that if you can't know when somebody's going to be offended at any given moment, and they might just choose to be based on their sudden change in gender identity, it really does become a huge problem for people, not just in churches, but everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true.
All right, so a few more things we should probably touch on here.
How about the fact that the law says in the footnote below the church comment, I think it's footnote number 15 or 13, I forget which one it is. It says all these decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. All punishments are made on a case-by-case basis.
So it's random.
And they had to put that there to make sure that people didn't, act as we are and say, well, we're concerned about churches. And they go, look, see, we're just going to case-by-case basis, guys. Don't worry, we're going to treat you all fair.
Oh, I found it. It's footnote 13. All charges, including those involving religious institutions or religious exemptions, are reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So, gee, that's fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty much you're done, because the same state that passed this law and wrote this guidance is the one that's going to be passing judgment.
Well, and it's if you think you can trust the government on this, good for you, whatever. But the fact is. And there's a balance here, obviously, to what I'm about to say. You can't go out and stab people to death because you feel like it. But when a church is going to let the government, I guess I'll put it this way: a church that would let the government tell it how it can act, as long as it's not committing actual harm against people, is a church it's putting itself at the whim of a government, and probably will not survive too much longer.
Yeah, there isn't much in the way of religious liberty that could possibly survive this. I mean, they're losing on all kinds of fronts. It's a war. It really is.
Yeah, no, it really is.
All right, so how do people reach you or contact you or give you great stories or whatever you can share?
Stream.org is where I write for. Twitter.com/Dustin Siggins. And I actually get a lot of tips from people over the years. So people should tweet me. They should look me up through stream.org. And, just put comment sections below my articles. Let me know. I often skim the comments. So, be sure to look me up and let me know of any stories you're hearing along these sort of lines, or government corruption, budget, and a lot of other issues I cover as well.
All right, Dustin, thanks so much for taking time to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, Mike Rogers, good to talk to you again. Of course, spent some time with you, some quality time last night at the event with Trevor Loudon and the premiere of The Enemies Within. Great film. You have any thoughts about that, or did you want to talk about something else?
Well, I mean, that in itself is fascinating. Just the sheer number of compromised congressmen and senators is stunning. And that just doesn't even begin to touch the number of moles, advisors, and assorted ne'er-do-wells that have been inducted into government over the past few decades. Ever since FDR brought in some like-minded people who, for all intents and purposes, were communists into his government, we've had a growing level of influence. The trouble is that some of the folks in government don't think that differently from communists to start with. But then when you get, 80 congressmen and 25 senators or something like that, that are effectively owned and operated by either front organizations for the Communist Party or front organizations for the Muslim Brotherhood, that's pretty scary. And the fact that those people can get onto Judicial Committee and intelligence oversight committees, mole? No, these people are sitting there in the open, basking in the sunlight.
They are running. They are running the country.
In keeping with my little "don't panic" icon there, they are in fact, effectively wearing a cloak of invisibility. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but essentially, if you have something that's so outrageous before your eyes, your brain refuses to process it. And this is what's going on. These people are right in front of us. They appear to be Muslims. They appear to be subversives. They appear to be communists. And we just say, that can't be possible. They're just Americans with some of that in their background. No, they aren't.
And at the exact same time, you have people who are willing to disregard candidates because, say, somebody in the KKK endorsed them, or they got a nod or a kind word from somebody who is at least culturally recognized as an unpleasant sort of individual. So you have these people going off the rails, basically, and saying that some candidate is invalidated entirely because of this very, fly-by-night association, when in the meantime you have all of these congressmen and all of these senators who have financial and personal ties to groups and individuals who are sworn to basically destroy America, and they're like, well, that's no big deal.
Right. Well, America is the perfect place to begin if you want to achieve communism, according to Karl Marx. And the reason that's the case is that he postulated, very, very crude paraphrasing, that in order to achieve communism, you first had to effectively have the wealth of capitalism.
Right.
In other words, you had to steal the rich guys' money before you could hang them.
Yeah, because it doesn't work without other people's money. And, of course, as we all know, eventually you run out of other people's money.
Well, the perfect example of that is sitting a couple of hours flight to, maybe about 6 hours from here, but a couple of hours flight south of the United States, and that would be Venezuela. When I visited Venezuela in the late 80s, it was one of the more prosperous Latin American nations. It had a large middle class. The place was basically clean and bustling, and plenty of food choices, including local stuff that I personally wouldn't eat, but the locals valued. The point is, it was well supplied, it was well functioning. You had the beginnings of trouble. The government had authoritarian tendencies. I think Chavez was just beginning to cause trouble about then, but essentially you had a robust middle class and a robust military made up of people that were not kindly disposed to this kind of takeover. But hey, the Chavistas succeeded, and Maduro has carried on the legacy. They completely misunderstand how to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time, because only capitalism and free markets can do that. As a result, nothing gets to anywhere, anytime, and the people are starving, not to mention not having toilet paper or any other necessities.
I think it was pretty amusing in the movie. I think it was in the movie when somebody said that a guy took a picture of rolls of toilet paper in the shape of a heart, and sent it to his wife as a gift because he gave her toilet paper because it was so rare and so difficult to get toilet paper in Venezuela that it was really
it's a wonder. Yeah, a wonder he wasn't mugged on the way home or hijacked. There was about 20 rolls there, making up that giant heart that he photographed. That's exactly the point. Socialism fails every time it's tried, and we have our sworn enemies working to subvert everything that we stand for. And of course, then there's the old chestnut of American exceptionalism. I came here 31 years ago, and I thought the Americans were too big for their boots, and they used stuff that was too big and too greedy and too guzzly, whether you were talking about washing machines or vehicles. But, I've been here long enough. I understand now. I understand what the exceptionalism is. It isn't about bragging about what you've got or what you've done or what you can do. American exceptionalism is the fact that the country is founded differently. It is the epitome of Apple's think different. It is a set of rules that attempt to codify safeguards against the worst of human nature to prevent what happened to Venezuela happening here, to prevent corruption and subversion of our government by greedy people like Hillary Clinton. And it's failing. It's failing because liberty requires eternal vigilance, and the people have enjoyed the fruits of this wonderful experiment, American exceptionalism, and they think that exceptionalism is just leading a happy and prosperous life. They don't understand that you have to guard the source of your prosperity.
It is a problem. I do hope a lot of people see Trevor's movie, even just for the bits about the immigration issue, which is huge, because again, if the Democrats get the one-party state they've been after, and they manage to do it by legalizing illegal immigrants or bringing in more to dilute the natural liberty-loving population, then they can pretty much pass and regulate anything they want, and that's pretty much how we end up being Venezuela.
Yeah, well, excuse me, we seem to have incoming here. My neighbors seem to be into fireworks, so hopefully...
Oh, that's okay. I don't hear it, so... I have dogs barking in the background. Does that count?
I'm not hearing them, so we're good.
Yeah, we are.
What's interesting is I was just commenting on an article on Conservative HQ, a venue that I thoroughly recommend, run by one of the oldest and crustiest conservatives in the country, Richard Viguerie, who pioneered the stuff that fills your mailbox, money-raising direct mail, basically.
Yeah.
But the point is, he's a great commentator on conservatism, and having been Cruz supporters from the beginning, Conservative HQ came around to Trump and came to the conclusion that never Hillary is the place to be, not never Trump. And also they're analyzing what Trump's bringing to the table and saying, the guy's a bit random here and there, but essentially he's got good advisors and he's bringing about good, good policies, or bringing forth good policies. But one of the things about this is they were talking about how he can win Michigan, and they were talking about Detroit, and of course, and Flint, and that famous line that came out from Trump's campaign this week, which is, it used to be cars were built in Flint and you couldn't drink the water in Mexico. Now, cars are built in Mexico and you can't drink the water in Flint. And, that really resonates with the poor bastards who that's happening to. And it's happening because they've had Democrat-run state and county and town government for so long. It's the fact the water's not drinkable is because of town government malfeasance, basically trying to cheapskate their water supply by disconnecting from Detroit and failing to properly process the water they were pulling from the Detroit River. You'd think in a heavily industrialized area that might not be a good idea without a little extra thought, but they did it anyway. Incredible. But where I was really getting wound up was on the immigrant issue. Because they were mentioning these voluntary agencies, such as Lutheran Resettlement Services, who've had to rename themselves because, like everything else liberal, they're becoming a dirty word.
Yeah, they are a Centria now.
Yes, that's right. And
What
is it with big corporations or liberal organizations that get themselves a bad name and change to something beginning with A, like one of the accountant companies that changed their name to Accenture or something?
Right. Did you hear that a recent survey by, I don't know if it was Yale or some other Ivy League organization, and they were talking to municipal government employees and people involved in municipal planning. And they said that you can't use the words climate change anymore in a conversation because it's like a bad word now. Everybody sort of turns you off if you say the word climate change, which means they changed it from global warming to climate change, and now they have to change it to something else because it's such an unpopular term, at least at the municipal level, which kind of relates to the thing you're talking about. We've had local organizations around here who've had to change their name. They don't care. They continually do it. Like we saw in Trevor's movie, you have these groups that just, the Communist Party in the United States was having problems, so everybody just moved over to this other group. This other group that has this other name that sounds a little better, and then they just keep doing the exact same thing they were doing before successfully.
Right, which I think brings us to the point that you can't ban individual organizations. Not only is it probably not constitutional, it doesn't work because they'll keep changing their names. You have to ban what they do and make it illegal to do certain things, particularly to make it illegal to subvert the local hierarchy of management, of zoning and permissions and so on and so forth. Which, by the way, Kelly Ayotte won her primary. Let's just take a tangent for a moment because we're talking about organizations changing their names. You're thinking of the various regional planning boards and things. And, of course, Kelly was complicit in the passing of AFFH, which, let's decode that alphabet soup, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And if you decode that mouthful with your secret decoder ring, it basically says, telling you what to build, where to build it, and who to put in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it ain't going to be people you like. And,
nope. Isn't part of that the deal where like what happened with Iowa from Chicago, where Boston could say, well, we need to move some of these people, and you're going to take them.
Yeah, and to which the local town's proper response should be, and this is where I was making some comments. Hell no, we won't pay. We won't pay to put them in our schools. We won't pay to house them. We won't feed them. If you, Boston, want to put these people here, you rent the houses, you pay the extra school taxes, you pay for remedial English tutoring, and you pay their welfare until they're self-sufficient. What I was actually ranting about in a comment was about Lutheran Resettlement Services and what they do. And, when I moved to this country, I immediately began paying taxes to the town, the state, and the federal government. As such, I had reasonable expectation of public schooling for my kids. As purchaser of premium medical coverage, I had and continue to expect service whenever needed. When Lutheran Resettlement Services, or whatever name they need to hide under, gets a grant to resettle refugees, they have obligations which they are not meeting. First of which is to make the incoming families self-sufficient. In my opinion, this should include remedial English, lessons in U.S. laws and customs, and getting them sustainably employed, tax-paying members of the community. As a nominal arm of the Christian church, Lutherans should be funding these activities through normal Christian charity. Clue. If the church members in the area can't afford it, the refugees are probably in the wrong place. But here's my kicker. If Lutheran cannot get the refugees self-sufficient, they own that family and the problem until they solve it. Stop taking our tax money and then passing the problem on to the already broke cities and states. Get off the government dole. Call yourselves Christians? Because I don't.
No, and I mean, I don't. Obviously, like the Catholic charities that do the same thing, their biggest source of income is resettlement money from the federal government. I'm not sure if that's true with the Lutheran agency, although it very well may be because there's an awful lot of money there. But you're absolutely right. I think the states and the cities and the counties need to step up and say, look, you have got to do something about the way this is managed, because they are. I mean, Manchester is a fine example. I mean, Ted Gatsas may have not been the best candidate for governor, but for a while there, he was wrestling with these resettlement services and saying, look, we can't afford these people. What are you doing to us?
Yeah, and they're freaking Christian organizations. Do they not have churches? Do they not have church schools? Here, get a clue. You're bringing these people in. Why don't you educate them in your schools? Because we're not going to take them.
In the day, wouldn't that be the thing? The mission would be to convert them to Christianity, or to keep them in Christianity, and to do so in the church, and to keep them close to the church. Now, they're not doing that anymore, obviously.
Yeah, what was it in the skit that Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter did? Something like, let's invade their countries, convert them to Christianity, and take over their governments, or something like that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if we did that than having them come here and convert us to whatever their belief system happens to be?
Well, we're down to about a minute and a half. I don't know. I think people need to see Trevor's movie. If you don't want to buy the communist stuff and the infiltration, you really need to look at the immigration and the Muslim problem. Even if you ignore the Muslim problem, you really need to look at the immigration situation, because you're really talking about bringing in millions of people who are dependent on Democrats, who are going to vote for Democrats. And if you let them vote, you will no longer be able to have anything but Democrat presidents. And once that happens, given the Obama template, there isn't really anything we can do to stop them.
No, so that comes to the interesting point. Let's look at the problem on the micro and macro scale here. Democrats took over places like Detroit and Chicago, made them into one-party cities, and the gentrified locals left. And no, let's not call it white flight. Let's call it the flight of the achievers. There was black flight as well. Anybody who could do better for themselves or had done better for themselves got out while the going was good, got out before the house values completely collapsed, and moved to a different part of the state or another state altogether. When states go bankrupt, in California, people leave. They vote with their feet. What happens if the Democrats succeed in overwhelming the United States, instituting oppressive taxation and regulation, and killing the golden goose? Where do the people go? This is the point that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and their fathers make. After the United States, there is nowhere that has or had the same level of opportunity. Where do you go to reclaim your freedom if you allow it to be stolen from you here?
Texas?
Ah, yes, the free Lone Star State, which may well be the lone state of United Americans, turning some words around.
If enough of us went down there, we would really throw off the balance of power that the Democrats have been trying to take over Texas for years. So
but wait, what about that guy that was worried about Guam? If enough of us moved to Texas, wouldn't the country tip over?
Yeah, it would. Texas is pretty big. We could all fit in there. The whole world could fit in Texas, but they don't want to talk about that. I don't know. Maybe the Rio Grande would get a little deeper or wider. Who knows?
I'd be willing to help dredge it to keep Mexicans swimming for longer.
Like a moat.
With sharks and alligators.
Yeah, sharks with laser beams on their heads. Yeah, okay. All right, well, we are pretty much out of time. I don't want to talk more than I have space for in the podcast. Mike, thanks so much for taking time to talk.
That's fine. Let's get in the habit of setting a topic and stuff. But you caught me in mid-comment, so I was ready to rant. It was perfect.
All right, good deal. Have a good night.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, we'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, that was Mike Rogers. You know who Mike is. Coming up next, Greg Moore from Americans for Prosperity. We're going to talk about the New Hampshire primary right after this quick nod to the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Get started here. We're talking to Greg Moore. In past life, he has been many things, including the Chief of Staff to the New Hampshire House and Mr. Speaker Bill O'Brien, and is currently the State Director of Americans for Prosperity in New Hampshire. Good evening.
Good evening. Good to be on the show. Always an interesting time. People give a lot of backwards reflections after elections, and they try to rationalize what actually happened. It's always an interesting to hear how people's conventional wisdom changed after some people actually voted.
I'd like to get your 30,000-foot view of the primary on Tuesday. New Hampshire had a statewide primary on September 13th. That would be Tuesday, just passed. Lots of things happened. We had some really tight races, some blowouts. So what do you think?
Well, I think that first and foremost, one of the biggest takeaways is that it was a very low turnout. It's looking like the final number is going to be right around 110,000. That's historically very low. It speaks frankly to the fact that a lot of the oxygen is being sucked out of people's political views by this presidential race. The presidential race we're seeing is probably one of the noisiest ones we've seen in recent memory. Obviously, presidential races by their nature tend to be pretty vocal, but this one in particular has seemed to have the attention of a lot of people. And coming off of a record-setting presidential primary to see a historically low state primary, I think shows that people are thinking about November already.
Having been in the sausage factory here of politics in New Hampshire, of all places, for, I don't know, we're getting close to 10 years now. Most of the people that I talk to are very state-focused. The people inside politics are very state-focused. They know that on the ground in New Hampshire, you can really make a big difference. And we've seen that in some of these races where important seats were lost or won by a handful of votes. So, and the other part of that I wanted to mention is you're right about the presidentials. I was talking to a guy outside a polling place in Merrimack, and he's like, the turnout's pathetic, but he's like, I'm thinking about it. And he says, a lot of these Trump voters are people who were never registered before. A lot of them came out of the woodwork just to vote in the presidential. They're not voting in the local races where we kind of, get our bread and butter as far as stories and all sorts of things. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and that's obvious. The presidential primary is really just a case where a lot of there's a year build up, as you know. It's almost like it's not like it is an institution here in New Hampshire. There's so much money that's spent in terms of TV ads and voter contact, and so many campaigns that staff up to such a huge degree. Vastly more field staff than you'd see in a regular election here. So it's to be expected that we see that huge amount of turnout. But just looking at the Republican side, think about it for a second. There were close to 285,000 people who voted in February, and a lot of those people were first-time voters, and they were drawn into it largely because of an attraction to Donald Trump. And then we come down to the September state primary, and we're seeing 110,000. Obviously, that's far less than half of the people who voted just in February. And if people find it easier to go out, in a cold day in February than to go out on a beautiful day in September, that tells you a little bit about where people's minds are. And I think that the closeness of some of these races, it was largely driven by the hard work of the campaigns. And in particular, I want to give some credit to Congressman Frank Ginta and the work his staff did to build frankly what was probably the most effective ground game. And I think the way you can measure that, Steve, is just looking at the number of raw votes in the primary in the first congressional district versus the second congressional district. And when you're seeing 110,000, but over 60,000 of them are in one half of the state. That tells you that there was something going on in that half of the state. So to see the disparity between the first and the second congressional district tells you it really wasn't driven by a statewide phenomenon. It really was driven by Frank Ginta working hard to turn out his vote. And certainly one of the beneficiaries of that hard-working turnout that Congressman Ginta did was Chris Sununu, Executive Counselor Chris Sununu, because most of his district is located in the first congressional district. So it's highly possible that part of the reason why Chris Sununu was able to score a victory on Tuesday was largely because of the turnout that was being driven by Frank Ginta in order to win his primary.
I haven't had a chance to look yet. Is there a disparity in the Democrat turnout versus the Republican turnout for New Hampshire?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The turnout was just over 60,000 on the Democratic side, but they didn't have much in the way of primaries beyond the governor's race. So it really wasn't a case where you saw a real challenge with the Senate. It was going to be Governor Hassan was running unopposed. You saw Carol Shea Porter and Ann Custer were running unopposed. So they didn't have the multiple number of races that can pull people off the couch and to bring them in on election day.
So it's good to know they don't care that much about who runs for governor then, doesn't it?
well, and you got to give some credit to Executive Counselor Colin Van Osten. Now, he spent a lot of money. He raised close to $1.2 million in advance of the primary, and he spent a good chunk of that. And he wanted to make sure he won. Obviously, he felt concerned by probably the fact that Mark Connolly has a long and distinguished history in state government, and Steve Marchand obviously was the guy trying to run as a Bernie Sanders type. And Van Osten probably saw what happened with Bernie Sanders in February and said, I better get on my horse here and start riding hard. And he did. And so sometimes you have to show the respect and give the credit to the people who do run these substantially effective campaigns. And Colin Van Osten did that to this point.
Any surprises in, like, say, the state senate or House races?
In hindsight, you certainly can see some of the things happening in advance before they actually do. But sometimes, particularly for the races that are more distant from the southern part of the state, some of the information you get tends to be a little spottier. So, for example, I'll suggest that I was hearing from a lot of activists up in Coos County who thought that Leon Rideout was going to win his Senate primary handily. Obviously, that didn't happen, and that's to the credit of Lucy McFall and the great campaign that she put together, Dottie McFall. And I think that was a case where not a lot of people down in the southern part of the state were expecting that. And you have to give credit to the people who run a strong race. And we saw that. I think a lot of other people weren't expecting the race between Ruth Ward and Jim Beard to be as close in the 8th Senate district on the Republican side. Mm-hmm. Same thing on the Democratic side in District 9 with Jeannie Deach running against Lee Nyquist. A lot of people thought that Nyquist, as a two-time nominee, was gonna run away with it, and that didn't happen. So you tend to look at these races after the fact, and you ask yourself, well, first of all, who are you counting on as far as the intelligence you're getting from inside the district, and if you miss something, you have to ask yourself, okay, what exactly did I miss, and how do I make sure I don't make that same mistake again? And certainly the most closely watched Senate race, it seems, was the race in Senate District 24, where Dan Innes ultimately prevailed in what many people thought was going to be what was going to be and ended up being one of the most vigorous primaries out there. Another one where some people across the state seemed to be surprised was in the Senate District 18 race, which is in Manchester and Litchfield, or parts of Manchester and Litchfield, where it appears at this point Ross Terrio has won by 5 votes over George Lambert. And I think that some folks didn't expect Ross to be successful, but he did a good job of putting together a focus on Manchester, and now he's got the tough task of running against Donna Soucy, who's definitely a well-funded candidate and someone who's very close to the Democrat Party leadership. So she'll get a ton of their support.
So Sean Jasper survived.
Yeah. So Speaker Jasper was running in Hudson and Pelham, and certainly there were a number of folks who were either raising concerns about some of the things that happened in the House over the course of the last two sessions, particularly on the issue of expanding Medicaid and continuing Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, and a lot of the concerns that went along with that. And as well as there was a pact that did an independent expenditure that also actively advocated for Sean Jasper's defeat in the seat. And when you look back at those types of races, where you have these big jumbled primaries, it's a case in which all those folks who are running in those races have to run their own races, and people often lose sight of the fact that in order for someone to lose in one of these multi-candidate races, it means everybody else has to run a better race. So I think that sometimes people have these perceptions that these races are basically a thing unto themselves, and that's really not how it works. A lot of times when people have to vote for 11 candidates, they might vote for 3 or 4 and not use all of their votes. And so very often, it's up to each individual person, again, in these multi-candidate seats, to make the case for their campaign and say, listen, just give me one of your 11.
We had a similar circumstance here in Merrimack where we had a couple of people that I was really hoping to get rid of. In the end, we ended up with 3 pretty decent-looking Liberty conservative candidates, and a lot of the squishy moderates kind of made their way in, but they all had name recognition. They've all been around for a really long time. People recognize their name when they look on the ballot, so that has a lot of play. I think people who aren't used to these small-town elections and this small-town politics don't really understand the amount of weight that gets attached to that when you have, say, a town of 25,000 people with 16 to 18,000 registered voters. When only a few thousand of them show up, the people who have name recognition are going to win.
Well, that's particularly true the further down the ballot you go. You certainly hope that most people who are running knew the names, or you'd hope, of the candidates running for governor or U.S. Senate or House of Representatives. As you go further down the ballot, it's definitely more and more of a challenge for people to be aware of all the candidates who are running. Frankly, if you're running and you have 8 or in my case in Bedford 6 or in Hudson Pelham 11, it's hard to know and remember all the individuals who potentially are running for office. So it's a case where each candidate has an incumbent upon themselves to build up their name ID, and that's always a challenge.
All right, a couple things off the state side. I know that AFP New Hampshire and Americans for Prosperity in general are working on a couple of issues that will affect New Hampshire if we choose not to pay attention and not learn the lessons of not knowing who's who and what's what. And if people go to the AFP New Hampshire Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AFPNH, right in the front, big blue, says, "Tell Congress don't tax the internet."
Yeah, and there's an ongoing effort. Certainly there are a number of states across the country who say, how can I get some more money in without raising taxes on my citizens? And it's the old adage, tax not me, tax not thee, tax that fellow behind the tree. Mm-hmm. That whole philosophy is really what's driving the whole internet sales tax idea. And what it is this notion that in Washington, they want to pass a law to allow states to collect sales tax from the citizens who are buying products, who live in their state, who are buying products from other states. Now there was a court ruling, and this was actually developed around the notion of catalog sales. And the argument of the people who are proposing this law change is the internet's very different than catalog sales. But what the court ruling suggests is that the transaction takes place at the vendor's location and not at and not at the buyer's location. And this would basically flip that notion so that the transaction would be considered to be at the buyer's location, meaning at their computer where they're buying something on the internet, and that would make the vendor responsible for collecting taxes for the whatever the state, the county, the municipality that has the sales tax, and then they'd be responsible for remitting that tax to the appropriate taxing authority. Now that really hurts New Hampshire because obviously we don't have a sales tax. A lot of retail operations like to come to New Hampshire and set up shop here because that gives them a competitive advantage to just sell stuff here. Think of companies like PC Connection and Merrimack and some of the other places that allows them to sell, frankly, in many cases 5, 6, 7% less just by doing business in New Hampshire. And if you flip that so that suddenly the sales tax is now paid to where the place is sold, that's lost. And the idea here being that doing that will bring in more revenue to the state. The problem is that's a logistical nightmare, an absolute logistical nightmare for the businesses here in New Hampshire because there are almost 10,000 taxing authorities across the country charging sales tax. Some state, some county, some local, some even within localities. And try to keep tabs on them. What that forces is every single vendor now has to buy a product. Oh, one of the biggest supporters of the internet sales tax, Amazon, happens to have that product already in place. So guess what? If this internet sales tax took effect, Amazon would stand to gain a ton of money by selling their sales tax calculation software package. So frankly, that helps to understand why some of these big technology firms are pushing the internet sales tax, as well as state legislators. Former House Speaker Terry Norelli, when she was the head of the National Conference of State Legislators, was there when they made this one of their top priorities because, again, they feel like it's, quote, free money, close quote, even though the citizens of those states are not going to have to pay that tax. They act as if because the business is located in another state that suddenly people won't notice it or recognize it. It's just another backdoor way to try to raise taxes on people, and that's one of the reasons why we're fighting it.
I've had my differences with Senator Ayotte, but she's been really good on this issue. Is there anybody else in New Hampshire that's really for this? Because I can't see how this helps New Hampshire at all. If there's no tax advantage to being here, why even set up business in our borders?
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time talking about tax competitiveness. In fact, our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity Foundation, is actually going to be holding an event next Thursday on the 22nd in Manchester about the impact of the business tax reductions over the last 2 years. There's actually been 4 business tax reductions over the last 4 years. And since those tax reductions have been put in place and that New Hampshire has become more competitive, not only have jobs exploded across the state, but also our revenues have gone up. Not the $90 million hole that Governor Hatson suggested when she vetoed the budget last year. In fact, business tax revenues are up. Since this law has gone into effect, or these laws began to go into effect, business tax revenues are up almost 17%. So it's a case where we're going to take the opportunity to talk about the policy and talk about the implications of cutting business taxes for the purpose of making the state more competitive. Because I know you and your readers know because they tend to be a very, very informed crowd. But prior to these business tax reductions, New Hampshire had the 3rd highest business tax rate in the country.
That's one of those statistics that I keep coming back to over and over again whenever I'm writing about it because it's so true. All right, we're just about out of time. How can people contact you if they want to help out or whatever?
If anyone wants to come onto our website, it's afpnewhampshire.com. It's the easiest way to get to our website. They can find us on Facebook and find us on Twitter. There are opportunities for people to get involved and get engaged. Again, if they want to get involved in that breakfast, that business roundtable luncheon next Thursday, they should check out our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity Foundation Hampshire, AFPFNH, on Facebook, and they can sign up there.
Well, Greg Moore, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
All right, you have a great night.
From National Review, Pity the Poor Transgenderist Driver. A friend of mine at a nearby university has a grievance to take up with the local Assistant Deputy Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. It seems there is a hitherto unnoticed species of oppression that has yet to be addressed on most campuses. This is preferential parking spaces for cis-engined electric vehicles. As it happens, my Ford F450XL extended cab diesel Super Duty self-identifies as an electric bioethanol hybrid. This makes parking in university parking lots a very traumatic and hurtful experience for my pickup truck. Every time I'm on campus, circling past the most conveniently placed, perpetually empty parking spots, exclusively and ostentatiously reserved for cis-engined electric vehicles, my pickup is implicitly attacked and judged. These preferential parking spaces denigrate my pickup truck's painful process of self-discovery, through which it came to see that its mechanically given assigned engine did not correspond to its authentic inner engine. Until recently, this realization had been suppressed by our mechanico-normative cisgenist culture that habitually and unself-consciously imposes false, binary, and deterministic narratives upon vehicle propulsion. My pickup's important witness problemizes the assumption that just because it was assigned the throaty growl of a 6.7-liter Power-Stroke V8 turbo diesel at manufacture, it can't identify as a zero-emission battery pack. It deserves to be affirmed and celebrated and protected from retrograde vehicular policies so that it too can have a convenient and safe parking space. Tesla, check your privilege. And thanks to Skip Murphy for that link. You can read his story on GraniteRock.com. All right, I'd like to close out the program with some audio from Daniel Hannan. He was recently interviewed by Kimberly Moran. You can check out the complete interview and her associated article at NH Political Buzz or on GraniteRock.com. Just search for Daniel Hannan. Here's the audio. He is explaining some of the after effects of the recent Brexit vote.
So far, everything, with one exception, everything that they predicted has turned out to be false. So they said that there would be a collapse of our stock exchange. British stocks are the best performing in Europe. They said that unemployment would rise. It's fallen. They said that consumer spending would decline, just not when we leave, but just on the back of the vote, right? The opposite has happened. We have more startups since the vote than before it. Investment is up. The only thing, literally the only thing that has happened accurately that the Remain side said would happen is that there has been a, frankly, long overdue correction in the value of the pound. The pound was overvalued before because the euro crisis, the disaster unfolding in Greece and Italy and so on, had pushed a lot of people to buy sterling as a haven currency. And sterling was already in decline before the vote, but I think it is now at a more realistic level. And as with the two previous devaluations we've had in recent memory, so far that seems to be the prelude to a great period of growth.
Right. So, and now it'll continue on. There's a lot more work to happen before you're completely out, correct?
So it'll probably be a couple of years before we actually leave. And it's really important that we get this right. And by getting it right, I mean two things. First of all, I want it to be a mutually beneficial process. It has to be advantageous to us, but it also has to be fair to our friends and allies in Europe. We want to retain good relations with them. We're still going to be military allies, we're still going to be trading partners. Although we will have repatriated the right to make our own decisions, that doesn't mean that we stop cooperating on fighting migration illegally or fighting climate or environmental questions or whatever. That's the first one. The second point is, getting out of the EU is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. The real objective here is a freer, more democratic, more prosperous Britain. And that means that having left, we have to now take advantage of the opportunities. And that means having competitive taxes, welfare reforms, cheaper energy, a whole bunch of things, as well as having more trade deals with the rest of the world. Starting, I hope, with NAFTA, right? The kind of really natural, easy tie-up between the UK and possibly some of the other non-EU economies in Europe, like Iceland and Norway, and NAFTA. It's a genuinely free trading agreement, NAFTA. We would have slotted in very easily with it. Our accession to it, I think, would raise GDP here and in Britain at almost no cost.